The night the knock came, it sounded less like a request and more like a heartbeat begging to be heard. Elias Crow had learned to recognize the sounds of desperation. Living alone in a weather-beaten house on the edge of Marrow's Bend, he spent most evenings listening to the wind argue with the trees and the pipes complain in the walls. So when someone knocked softly, unevenly, as if afraid to exist, his body reacted before his mind did. He stood still, breath held, wondering who could possibly need him at this hour. Another knock followed, then a whisper, "Please, I just need somewhere safe." Elias opened the door. On the porch stood a woman clutching a little girl to her chest. The woman's coat was too thin for the cold, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion rather than fear. The child, maybe 6 or 7, had fallen asleep mid-sob, her cheek pressed against her mother's shoulder. They looked like they'd been running from something for a very long time. "I'm sorry," the woman said quickly, words tumbling over each other. "I know this is strange. I saw your light. I didn't know where else to go." Elias didn't ask their names. He didn't ask why. He simply stepped aside and said, "Come in." That was how it began. If this story touched your heart, like, share, and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us keep spreading hope. Elias had never thought of himself as brave. He was a man who fixed broken things, chairs, fences, old radios, because broken things felt honest. After his wife passed years earlier, leaving him with memories and silence, he found comfort in mending what others threw away. People in town called him poor, and they weren't wrong. His bank account hovered near empty, his clothes were second-hand, and his house leaned slightly to the left. But there was always soup on the stove and room by the fire. The woman introduced herself as Mara Linfield the next morning, her voice steadier in daylight. The little girl was Ivy. Ivy had hair the color of late autumn, leaves and eyes that studied everything carefully, as if memorizing escape routes even while holding a spoon of oatmeal. "We won't be trouble," Mara said, standing stiffly by the table. "Just a few days. I'll find work somewhere else." Elias nodded. "You're safe here," he said, and meant it in the simplest way. He had no idea who they were running from. He only knew that no one arrived at a stranger's door in the middle of the night unless the world behind them had become unbearable. Days turned into a quiet rhythm. Mara helped around the house, her hands quick and grateful. Ivy followed Elias like a shadow, watching him fix things, asking endless questions about how broken objects could be made whole again. "Why don't you throw it away?" she asked one afternoon, pointing to an old lamp he was repairing. "Because it still wants to work," Elias replied with a smile. "Sometimes things just need someone to believe they can." Ivy considered this deeply, then nodded. At night, Elias heard Mara crying softly through the thin walls. He never mentioned it. Kindness, he believed, wasn't about fixing people. It was about giving them space to breathe. What Elias didn't know was that somewhere far beyond Marrow's Bend, a man with limitless resources was searching. Mara's past was a life she barely recognized anymore. Once she had lived in glass houses with long hallways and quiet rooms. Once she had believed love meant control disguised as protection. Her ex-husband, called her boss, had never raised a hand, never shouted in public, never broken the law. His power came from influence, money, and the ability to make doors quietly close. When Mara finally left, taking Ivy and nothing else, she knew he wouldn't chase her with anger. He would chase her with persistence, with investigators, with polite men asking careful questions, with pressure that didn't bruise the skin but crushed the spirit. So she ran, and somehow she ended up here, in a crooked house with a man who owned almost nothing and expected nothing in return. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a black car parked too neatly at the edge of the dirt road. Elias noticed it while chopping wood. It didn't belong. People in Marrow's Bend drove trucks held together by rust and hope. This car looked like it had never known dust. That night, Mara's hands trembled as she washed dishes. "He found us," she whispered. Elias set down his mug. "Who?" She hesitated, then finally said, "My ex-husband. He has reach." Elias didn't ask how much reach. He didn't need to. He looked at Ivy curled up on the couch with a book, her feet tucked beneath her. "Is he dangerous?" Mara swallowed. "Not in ways you can call the police for." Elias nodded slowly. "Then, well, be careful." And they were. When strangers came asking questions, Elias answered with calm confusion. "No, haven't seen anyone like that." When offers were made quiet suggestions that helping would be rewarded, Elias shook his head. "Don't need money," he said simply. "Just peace." Calder's representatives grew frustrated. They couldn't threaten a man who had nothing to lose and nothing to take. Elias' power lay in his ordinariness, his stubborn decency. Weeks passed. Winter deepened. Ivy laughed more. Mara slept through the night for the first time in years. One evening, Ivy presented Elias with a drawing. It showed a crooked house, 3 stick figures holding hands, and a sun that took up half the page. "That's you," she said, pointing. "You fix things." Elias felt something loosen in his chest. Eventually the pressure faded. Calder, faced with no leverage and mounting scrutiny elsewhere, withdrew. Not because he had learned compassion, but because this small, quiet stand of humanity wasn't worth the effort. Mara knew they couldn't stay forever. Safety, she had learned, sometimes meant knowing when to move on. On their last morning, she packed their few belongings with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You changed our lives." Elias shook his head. "You did that. Yourself. I just kept the door open." Ivy hugged him tightly. "He'll remember," she whispered. Years later, Elias would receive a letter. Inside was a photograph of a smiling young girl standing in front of a modest home, her mother beside her, both of them glowing with something that looked like freedom. There was no return address, only a note. "You taught us that safety can come from kindness, and that hope doesn't need wealth to survive." Elias folded the letter carefully and placed it by the window. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, gentler now, and for the first time in a long while the house felt perfectly balanced, because sometimes the most powerful shelter in the world is a human heart willing to say, "Come in."